Welcome to Alignment First, where we're on a mission to bring leaders back to their peace, presence, and power. And I am here with Dr. Pat. I'm so excited for this conversation. One, because we have so much fun in getting to know each other before we hit record today. And what started out as a genuine engagement of curiosity and potential solicitation brought us to this conversation here. And in the little research that I've done on your practice, can't wait to hear your origin story, moving from chiropractic and holistic health and wellness into business development and executive coaching, and wrapping that into a beautiful bundle for your clients. Because what resonates with everything that I've read about you is this and also proposition you've created through your process. I just had this conversation with a couple of clients of mine in which they are moving away from this existence where everything is either or, where there's an inverse relationship between their personal and their professional. And it really seems like from a lifestyle perspective, you've solved that problem. So with all of that being said, welcome to the show, Dr. Pat. How are you?
Thanks. I appreciate being here. I've had a little bit of audio, I don't know. Did you pick that up? I mean, hi, everybody.
You're perfect. I hear you loud and clear.
Okay, on my side, the Wi-Fi has been wonky ever since the whole city over here the other day was without electricity for 8 hours.
Oh boy,
the whole city.
Whatever would we do?
Oh, it's amazing. It's just like I remapped out my Sunday. And to plan too,
Yeah.
Go with the flow.
Sure. So
okay.
Walk me through the origin story. How did you come to chiropractics and this holistic approach to well-being, first and foremost? Because most of the people I know in your world experience some moment of burnout, and this was the inciting incident to lead them to solve their own problem and thus create the practice that they're in. Is that anywhere close to what happened to you?
No. But because I want to tell you, it's just like when we go back to looking at how I got into practice, I had a friend of mine who was forcing me to go on this donut and apple cider expedition. So that had to be like October, and that was in Michigan, probably in 1979, 80 or something like that. Mm-hmm. And so we went to go on this expedition, and on the way going, we had this kind of traumatic experience on I-94 going out to the cider apple mill in this area called Irish Hills in Michigan. Mm-hmm. And so when we get on the highway, about a half a mile, quarter mile down the road, probably not a half mile, quarter mile road down the road, there was the semi truck. And then people were starting to really slow down and slam on their brakes behind it. And then I couldn't say, like, my friend Terry, I said, Terry, what do you think's going on? And we get closer, and the back of the door of a semi truck that had dancing girls in it, and dancing girls are pigs, in that world. The door came up, and this pig got up. This is like taking an opportunity in its life and thinking, I'm going to slaughter. No way, dude. And he jumped, and
Wilbur from Charlotte's Web took his shot.
And so it's a true story, and so the pig jumped. I don't know if he died, but the next one jumped because everyone was following. They're sheep, right? They're kind of like sheep. They all follow each other. So they started jumping. So the semi trucks slamming on its brakes. There was an exit to get off. And I just said, Terry, we got to get out of here, because we were behind this. And I said, last thing we want to do is we want a pig on our hood. Right. And so, and then we got off, because this is a little bit now out of the country, on the countryside, out of sight of Ann Arbor, and we got off. I read about it, but they had pigs all over the road that were escaping, and I went, go for it, because they knew intrinsically, that they were doomed, They probably were still doomed, but dying, jumping out of a truck that's moving 60 miles an hour was a better option than going through the slaughterhouse. I mean, you have to think about that, right?
This is hands down in all my years of podcasting, the most original intro to a conversation ever. And I love everything about it.
I grew up in an Irish neighborhood. My mentor was Irish, and he was my mentor for about 50 some years. And he could tell Irish story. I mean, that's how I learned about why storytelling was so important, And so, he just would say to me constantly that Jay Leno lines like, who can make this stuff up? You can't make this stuff up, And he goes, where did it come from? And so that's where I learned my ability for storytelling. But that is the God's honest truth. And then you want to know why I got into chiropractic school is because he said to me at the cider mill that I had to walk home. And then because I said, I don't want to become a chiropractor, because all my friends in college were going to be chiropractors that I studied chemistry and all my biology classes with. And I went, I'm not going to do that. And so he said, yes, you are. And he goes, oh, you're walking home. And he goes, you have all pre-med. You have everything that you need to go to school. You've got the grades for it. Why don't you want to do it? And I said, this is the belief system of what you get from your parents and never to listen to them. Right here, I said, my father said they're quacks. And he goes, well, your father he has a master's in electrical engineering, and he wants you to be an electrical engineer. So do you think he's going to tell you to go to chiropractic school? And he's laughing. He goes, are you kidding? And so at any rate, and then it made sense to me. I mean, because when things make sense to me, I move forward with them full force, 100% committed, and I never look back. And that's how I ended up actually going to chiropractic school. And at the same time, I was also doing patient relations advocacy work at the University of Michigan Hospital on a volunteer basis for a independent study. So there you have it.
Yeah.
Your whole show, and that's like in 2 minutes.
I have no more questions, but we can button it up here. Where does this lead into entrepreneurship for you?
Well, because when I was 4 years old, I started selling lemonade on the street. And my mother would always say, I would take the first money, the money that I made back, because my father gave me the money. My mother didn't. My father gave me the money to buy the lemonade. And the container and the thing that had the ice, the cooler, that we had. And so he gave me the initial investment. And then after my first day selling lemonade, I was able to give him his money back. And then the rest of it was mine. And so, and I made like 80%. I mean, I had people, because everyone knew, I mean, it was the spoiled brat on the whole street. Everyone, when they went by, I'm standing in the street going, do you want lemonade? Do you want lemonade? I've got cold lemonade. It's so hot outside, and that's what I did. I was parked in the driveway in like suburbia of Detroit, south of Detroit in Southgate. My neighbors came over and bought lemonade from me. And at the end of the day, the container of lemonade was only like 8 cents or something like that. Right. Yeah. And so, but it was, that started that. And I always had that, thought process. I was always the out of the box thinker in my family. People would look at stuff and I'm like, well, isn't there an easier way to do that? Like if you're going down to get cans of something for mom, why don't you just bring a bag with you and get all the cans at one time? I mean, like I never thought that was rocket science. And science has always been very easy for me. So really that entrepreneurship started then. And then when I became a chiropractor and I got married and my husband was a chiropractor, we found a practice that was, that was for sale at a very incredibly reasonably priced. It was underserved. And when we took over in this practice, this guy was seeing maybe 30 patient visits a week. When we took over in this practice, by the end of that month, we were seeing over 100 patient visits a week.
Oh my God, 3X right there. Boom.
Boom. And then we just kept on going. And my husband and I were very good business partners. We were never good relationship wise because I was that out of the side of the box thinker. It's just like, oh, you want to go give a talk? Well, who can we talk to? Rotary Club, Lions Club. It's just like, what other groups, like the National Association for Federation for Women, they're on Cape Cod too. And that's where that's where we went to practice at. And it was cheap to live there. And the practice, ended up mushrooming. We got divorced. I bought him out, and then I sold it about 5 years later, in the mid 6 digits.
Wow. So let me ask you this. You seem to be so savvy, so wise. What's the most important lesson that you learned in relationships and business in your journey or in your practice?
Honesty.
In what way? I feel like that could be left to interpretation. What are we talking about?
I know it's a vague word. So, but when you're talking to a patient, it's just like I've been, I'm on the very direct side. So when someone says to me, what do you think? I said, I think it's going to take 6 months to fix this, and I said, if it takes less, great. And I said, but I'd rather overguess than underguess. And well, what does that mean? That means that, that you need to commit to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I always said people when at the very end, I said, I'm a very, very good doctor, very good doctor. And I said, so if you're looking for a very good doctor, I'm looking for a very good patient. So if you want to be a very good patient, we got to work together or else this isn't going to work. I can't fix something unless you show up. And that was at that time. And so when I got divorced, the practice mushroomed. And I said, God, people must have really hated my husband. Nothing personal, Emmanuel. But the practice really, really boomed. And I got so busy, I couldn't do it myself.
Yeah.
Even though I went to a Catholic school for 12 years and he was like, you just figured it out, so like you just showed up and you just figured it out. So I was able to I was committed to, when I was working, I was working. I didn't take phone calls from my friends. I didn't do something else and sit on my butt. I was on my feet and I was, cranking. I talked to people about health no matter where I went. I'd walk up to people in airports and say, how long have you had your shoulder problem? And they're looking at me like, who are you? And I say, I'm a chiropractor. This is when I practice chiropractic all the time. I said, I'm a chiropractor. I said, you need your shoulder fixed. Actually, I said, it's coming from your neck. And I'll show you why. Look up. Does that hurt? No, but I go, now look at me when I do that. Now look at that. Ask your friend. Let's take a video. Like when cameras first came out, we did. I said, so do you think you have good range of motion? Turn your head right and left. I said, you need to get your neck fixed. I said, you can't get your neck fixed. The rest of your body doesn't work because gravity goes down. It doesn't go up.
Right.
And they're like, where are you from? Where's your practice? And then when I sold my practice and I started filling in, I'm constantly always asked, no matter what practice I've been in, where's your practice? And when I'm doing fill-in work, I'm ethically, it's just like, I don't touch other people's patients, and I just say, my comment to them is that I work virtually, and I said, this is when I'm working like hands-on, but it's very cool, in that regard. And even when I had a lot of executives that I treated that were, because I lived in Cape Cod, and Cape Cod was a hub to go into Boston by bus. So my whole first hour, no one talked, and that was the rule, because I already knew what I wanted to adjust on people based upon what I see. I didn't have to have them tell me, other than tell me what your symptoms are today. And just because they have the symptoms doesn't mean it's where we're going to adjust. I mean, they understood that. And so, and looking at, their spine, I would adjust, and get them out the door so they could get on the bus on time. And then, I had people going like, we don't understand. I got to go to Boston now, and the girl at the front desk always come back and she goes, I'm saying, I don't know whatever prayer you say. She was in Catholic. So, and she said, but if I can't deal with that person. I said, who is it? And she would tell me, I go, oh, she's probably got to get a plane. And I said, she was like, the last time I saw her, she told me she was going to Europe. I said, she's got to get up there if she's going to get the such and such flight, and because I used to take that flight too. And so I know. And so there's those things like that. I just made it work for people. I had people who, own newspapers, who are newspaper conglomerates in the United States, their wives, they're, semi-pro golfers. And I just had an access to a rich diversity, like within the practice of what people came in. I always had 4 women who were pregnant in my office my whole time I was in practice. And every time there was a break, people would start going, Dr. Pat. And I would go, no way. And I said, I'm sure somebody will come in pregnant within the next 24 hours. And it was a joke, as we went on, and I had these little Russian women going like, no man's going to want to marry you. You're too skinny. And that's more like an Italian accent. But it's just like, I can remember this Russian when she used to bring me bags of food, and groceries, and that's like kind of like one of the the fun parts of it, because for me, when it became not fun anymore, I sold it.
Now let me ask you, listen, like, man, there's so much there. So many people run out of fun and they keep the train running for way too long. Right. And
I know that
the energy that I'm getting from you is that regardless of what the multiplier could be, like, is it a line in the sand? This is no longer fun. Let's get this thing sold, or let's adjust some of the business logistics to increase profitability and then let it go.
I didn't have a problem with profit.
Okay.
I was very profitable. I bought my business and I sold it in the mid 6 digits.
Okay. So now
money was not the issue.
Yeah.
I said my brain sanity is more important to me than money, and I didn't want to be on Cape Cod anymore. And so, and I wanted to go have a life, Cape Cod was like being under a microscope.
Okay.
And so when I went to go buy groceries for dinner, I would have it would take me where normal people go in, they get a piece of fish, they get some vegetables, and they buy a bottle of wine or something and they're out the door. 40 minutes. Pat, what are you eating? It's like, why are you putting that and that together? I never thought about doing that before. You should give classes on this. I go, no, I shouldn't. This is my personal time. Get out of my way so I can get out of here. Well, I'm going to ask you tomorrow. I'm going to come in and I'm going to get adjusted. And while I'm there, and she said, I'll take notes. I said, how are you going to take notes when you're getting adjusted? Right. And she said, I'll bring my recorder in.
Yeah.
But I always had, things like that. So money, when I sold it, I was at as one of my higher points, in business. And then it was great. It was like, the timing was perfect. Everyone was really glad that I was going, happy that I was going, and I was moving on, because they didn't believe I was going to last there that long to begin with.
Oh, wow.
Which I thought was an interesting comment. Now you're telling me this? I would have left sooner, right. And then the other part of that, piece was that more men were absolutely irritated with me because, I was leaving them. And I thought that was the biggest surprise in that transition, getting out of there, and then I found somebody who came, wife's family is from the Cape. So she wanted to be back on the Cape. That's how he ended there. And that's how he ended up buying my practice and
Gotcha.
but he ended up hurting himself. And then instead of telling me about it, he ended up selling it to somebody for dirt cheap. So it cost him quite a lot of money to have them. Going like, God, I would have worked, I could, but I had a covenant not to compete for him. And they both didn't want me back on the Cape, because they said, oh, people will come and see you instead of coming and seeing us, and I just went, how ridiculous is that? And I said, you want to make some money? I mean, even in the situation that I'm in right now, underserved practice, and a doctor wants to convey it. And then that conveyance, it's just, he's a bad business person, if he's listening to this, sorry, but I said, he has made some significant logistical errors in judgment and going from one piece to the next piece, going forward with that, and he also, his, like when his P&Ls don't make sense. I mean, especially last year's one did not make sense. And, so, it's just like when people, are they don't want to pay the money for someone like an accountant to do it because it costs money, but
Yep.
you're not making more money. You're actually, like, when somebody doesn't know how to categorize their expenditures or take money out in a way that's not suspicious, then you have to, you have to know how to do that. And people, I like, you're a chiropractor, you're not you're not a CPA, and unless you were trained by one, then you have to understand how the business of running that business works. And you always can't, like, my rule was I never said no to anyone in pain. So that was a rule. That was like a hardcore rule. So if someone called up and they were in pain and I had 50 people on my books, I figured out a way so I didn't have to break my lunch up and still see them. But they just had to know that I had to go out and step in. And anyways, a lot of those people that are in that much pain, they needed to be iced out, and have a lot of ice on them, and then, so, and I always help people. A lot of my patients actually that I started with ended with me. So I had a high maintenance practice. And I didn't know what I was doing though.
Yeah.
So when I was in business, I was treating people how I wanted to be treated as a patient. And in business. And that's just what I ended up doing.
So for such a high touch, high maintenance way of conducting your practice, there's a through line in the word codes that you're using, the way that you're speaking, where you are adamant about the protection of your time and your boundaries.
Yeah.
Did you burn yourself out to create the value there for yourself, or is that something that you've always walked with?
I got bored with living on Cape Cod. I didn't feel like I had a life, and there isn't anybody on Cape Cod that I wanted to date and or marry. So for me, that social part of that life, I was always going someplace. So I had associate doctors that would work for me, and I'd go to Europe for 3 weeks. It was perfect. Those were the days. And then, and then I would come back and I would work, and I was fresh. I was ready to go, but the 3 weeks was crucial, because the first week you're still jonesing out, going like, okay, I'm up at 6 o'clock. Okay, I should be doing something, and then you get in the second week, you're going like, oh, okay, I can just have coffee this morning, let's go window shopping. And I used to go to Italy a lot just because of that slower pace, quality of food. And even in France, you still have a very high quality of food. So, and I always made myself go far enough away that I didn't understand what the hell was going on around me. So I didn't care if they were talking about me or not. And I would just go do what I wanted to do. I'd sit in a cafe for hours and just people watch. And look at how people, how they interacted, how they talked, how they looked on their face. So I did a lot of studying into communication in my practice, and it's just like when somebody would go into the poor me mode, I'd be like, well, why? I started thinking so why do you think you're not worthy of that? And the patient would go like, what do you mean? They would back up and immediately. And I said, no, seriously. And then I'd have other people, I have these charts on my wall. And this woman one time is in there, she's crying her eyes out. And I said, oh my God, what's the matter? And she said, I have everything up there. And I said, sweetheart, if you had everything up there, you'd be dead. And I said, so let's just pare it down and see what the biggest culprit is. I said, and fix that first, and then we can work from there, And so, and I had people who had, I had massage therapists that worked with me, we were all, it was a high energy office. And the very interesting stat in that particular office was called Barnstable Family Chiropractic, not in existence anymore because the second person ran it into the ground, all my staff were all fire signs. I mean, it was like one of those, when I was finishing chiropractic school, I was so far out of I was giving appointments away for people to get credit so they could graduate, and I decided I wanted to study something. I knew nothing about astrology, but I wanted to study medieval astrology because they used it as a form of diagnosis. And I thought it'd be interesting just to know. And so I studied that. And so when I went
I'm going to stop you really quick because skip to the end and then come back to what you were about to say in that. How did you integrate the astrology into your practice? Because you seem like a very intuitive integrator.
Well, what I did is when I ran into people, I would look at them and go, "Oh, you're a Virgo." I said, "Do you always have all your black clothes all together, like the black clothes, like short sleeve, long sleeve, you know?" And and I go, "Oh, you're a Taurus." I go, "You like really soft. I bet you like cashmere." I mean, I rarely ever wrong.
Tell me about Aries. I'm gonna be self-indulgent right now.
Oh, you can make me burn. It's just like I get along with other fire signs, very well, and because I'm a fire sign, I'm a Leo. My front desk, both people were Leo. One was a Sagittarian. Sagittarians have very quirky sense of humor. And it's like not everybody gets them, and which was true. And then the other person, she was the Leo, and that my bookkeeper, and lead insurance person that was helping me out, she's an Aries, and then and so everybody had and my massage therapist, he was the Leo. His birthday was like just a couple of days before mine. And so we had this fire sign. And when we went computerized, and that something like 27% of people that were in my office, I have a big database, they were all fire signs. No wonder they weren't, you didn't burn them out when they walked in the front door.
Just a high vibration,
high, people were energetic. I mean, I remember when I turned 40, one of my patients came in and he said, "Hey, Dr. Pat, what's with all the flowers out there?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, "All the flowers." And he goes, "Like they just brought in another flowers." And he said, "Did someone die?" And I just like, "Yo, dude, that's not the thing to say to me before. I adjust you. It might be something afterwards, but that's." I go, "I used to think you were smart until this very mere moment." And then, but we had a lot of fun, and. When people when I had people who couldn't afford payments, chiropractic care, and some of them, depending upon what their situation was, I adjusted a scale so that whatever they paid went to a fund for homeless dogs or dogs in the SPSC, and then I would meet that donation,
cool.
at the end of the month. And that, so there's some people, that were just like, how much did we have last month? And I said, "Well, don't send any more poor people into me." This is costing me, and I mean that with a big heart,
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, but I had we were rocking. I mean, at that point in time, we were really rocking. And when I decided to leave the practice, it really was because I just didn't want to die in Cape Cod. I couldn't see myself being there anymore. So I went to Boston, and I was in Boston. I had the life of Riley. I modeled, I traveled a lot. The airport was only 20 minutes away by subway. And it was an easy thing to handle. And I had the laterality and invites to travel around the world and see other chiropractic offices. So it was great at that time.
Wow.
And then I decided that okay, I've had enough of this. I decided to go back to school and study acupuncture.
Okay. And
so when I decided to do that, my ancestor in the House of Bourbon was the chiropractor, the apothecary. His name was I'm a direct descendant of his, and he was the apothecary for the House of Bourbon in what they call the Maison de Berber, and so the Maison de Bourbon, and for Marie de Medici. So he had a lot of, clout.
Oh my gosh.
So my girlfriend, when I found this out going to La Salle University in Quebec, my girlfriend just said, "The DNA hasn't changed in 400 years. And that because I love herbs, I love looking at natural things that can help support you and elevate your life. And I look at those first before I opt in to do something. I have this great cartoon that says, the health, like the surgery line, and then the alternative health line, holistic care. Sure. And that line's there's nobody in there, and everyone's over in the surgery line, because when people get into crisis, they go back into their primitive brain, which I call the lizard brain, and they're reactionary to it, as opposed to finding out specific information that's supportive of well, I have this, so what can I do? You're pre-diabetes. What drives me crazy lately is every time I'm hearing somebody pre-diabetic, "Oh, my doctor gave me metformin." Really? I don't understand that. How about dietary change? Why don't they never tell people to change their diet and elevate their lives? because the functional medicine model is, like diet first. The lifestyle medicine model is diet first, and the NIH happens to agree with that.
Yeah.
Although it seems like big pharma doesn't agree with that, and so it's interesting.
Yeah. Comparing the really long, fast line of surgery compared to the minimal, dare I say, empty line of functional medicine.
It's
holistic health,
not functional medicine. Functional medicine is been a branch that's been evolving.
Okay. Well, let's spend some time there real quick. Give me the differentiation so I can
functional medicine is your bioidentical. Well, functional medicine is about your bioidentical self. So you can have two people in the same family, or else when people say like, oh, it's a family thing that we all have high cholesterol. Well, that's because you all eat the same food. Hello. It's just like, food is medicine. You're either feeding a disease or you're feeding your health. And so in functional medicine, it looks at your bioidentity of how you're expressing your health and the environment. So your DNA is like, for me, how I've always learned it was that you have a rose bush. The rose bush doesn't bloom all at the same time. It does it in sections by what is the environmental factor. So you got to take a look at how the environment is affecting you. And then you can decide how like foods to eat or what works better for you. And so when you first like look at something like in my book, Why Are You Sick, Fat and Tired? In that book, it's a system survey chart that tells you where to start your health journey. It also tells you in that book, what's working, what's not working. It tells you your weakest link and your highest link of what's working for you. You want to look at what the pattern is of those links, and then you can decide how to move forward in an educated fashion that can help elevate your life in every aspect, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, socially, and even financially. Because if you can't think well, you can't make good decisions about money. So,
okay.
And it's all connected. I mean, when I first started telling people about gut-brain connection, people were looking at me like, wacko, crazy person, the chiropractor, that holistic doctor, and then what do you know? Puttermiller comes out with this great book, the gut-brain connection. And it's been white paper ever since then. So I said, hello, what do you think you get your nutrition from your food? If you can't absorb it, you're not what you eat. You have the ability to absorb. I mean, easy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like, if you're thinking, if you're eating food and you're finding it in the toilet, you're not absorbing it. So why bother even eating it? You got to fix your gut and change your life.
There's a principle there. You're not what you eat, you're what you can absorb. Okay. There's a lot, there's a lot of wisdom there. Okay. So functional medicine versus thank you for clarifying.
And there's also lifestyle medicine too, but they're like sisters of each other.
So, it seems like there's a relatively recent awakening around the concept that the gut-brain connection is not actually a top-down connection. It's actually a bottom-up connection. Your gut drives this, not the other way around.
In a chemical equation that has equilibrium, one arrow is going across like this, and with an arrow, like the end of it going up. The other arrow is directly below it and parallels it with the arrow part of it going down. That means that equation can go one way or the other, depending upon the logistics around it.
Sure. Okay.
That makes sense?
No, that's a great visual. So it is not dogmatic in the way that it's approached, or at least the way that it's presented in social media and whatnot. It's really,
if you keep on eating crappy food, you're eventually going to have a reaction to the crappy food,
right?
Because you no longer can absorb it. So like people who go like, oh, I used to be able to eat fried food all the time. Suddenly they can't eat fried foods because their gallbladder's clogged up and the liver can't handle the fat, that kind of fat,
right.
And so you're thinking like, well, what can I do? Oh, I'll just not eat fried food. Well, that's not addressing the problem. That's not going to the root cause. Like, well, why is that? Like what's going on in your gut that the pH is not correct? Oh, do you got GERD? That's when it has a tendency to, like for you to burp stuff
Yep.
up, you know, and the energy of your stomach is to go down, not to go up. So if it's starting to go up, or you have bloating after you eat, you got issues, you know, and that are important to address. And they're simple to address when you first start having, but the thing is, a lot of people don't pay attention to the signs and symptoms. Then all of a sudden they're 40 years old and they're going like, oh my God, I think I've had this for 5 years. It's just like, oh, or they ask their friend, what do you think? Oh, well, okay, that's great. You had it for 5 years, you know, it's just like, live with the dude. So it's like getting old is all about, you know, and I don't accept those as answers. That's not an answer.
So for somebody who's been in the game, for as long as you have, doing what you've done and having the impact that you've had, the question I have for you is, why are people so resistant to self-care?
Denial.
That was not on my top 3 Family Feud list. Tell me about denial.
Well, okay, let's say we're playing the Family Feud thing. It said, because people don't want to know about their health. They think that they can give it to somebody else, so they don't have to deal with it until they have significant signs and symptoms. So by the time they have significant signs and symptoms, that's already progressed. It's pretty, you know, established. So when people have signs and symptoms, they just kind of go like, oh, hopefully they'll go away, you know? And, you know, so they don't want to know. Because if they know, then they have to do something, you know. And when I ask people a question, what do you do? What are you willing to do to be healthy? Are you willing to do anything to be healthy? You know, that might mean spending some money, you know, and as soon as they have to spend money, no, my insurance should cover it. Your insurance doesn't cover health care. Your insurance covers sick care. So if you want to be healthy, you have to make that investment in yourself and make the right choice. And also a lot of people, they get so overwhelmed as soon as they open the book of supplementation. Well, it's like a lot cheaper to hire someone, you know, even like me, to sit there and go like, okay, your right side, left side, what does this make sense? And what's your bottom line? Because most people don't know what their foundational line is. If you don't know what your foundational line, it's like building a house on a swamp. You know, and it's just, or having, you know, JFK said the quote, like, all rising tide lifts all boats. Well, your boat better not have any holes in it or it's going to sink. It's not seaworthy, you know? And so that's that piece about like, well, what can I do to be healthy? You know, I always say that I'm 70 now, you say 70, but now that I'm 71. So I'm saying 71 going on 41 and that, and I'm very fortunate. I have good skin, you know, I eat well. You know, I have a drink every once in a while, but I'm always thinking about, how do I pair this drink? It's a carbohydrate. And I go, I'm going to have a steak. Okay, so it's a glass of red wine and the steak and a lot of green leafy vegetables. It's asparagus, you know, that kind of thing. Like, because those things all combine together to actually, chemistry-wise, work better. You know, so I'm not having 5 glasses of wine. I'm having a glass of wine, you know, in order to make that complement. It's a different way to think about like when you're eating and like, or, and how that feeds your health. I mean, even having a cold, people go, I'm sick. Okay. What's the philosophy of really saying that? I'm sick. You say, I don't feel well because I had exposure to something and now I'm sneezing. I have congestion because I have the stuff inside my body that has to get out. It doesn't make you sick. It makes you healthy. Because if that, I look at having a cold as expressing health.
That's a healthy response.
Because if you didn't, you'd be dead.
Right.
I mean, like that's.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Like, this is a conversation nobody's having. I love this. Keep going.
Yes. So there's people who have like signs and symptoms going, oh, I'm like, when they tell me they're sick, and I said, what kind of sick are you? I mean, there's different kinds of sick. I said, I'm sick, I'm hemorrhaging. That's sick that you go to the hospital for. You know, I'm sick, you know, I have a headache. Well, why do you have a headache? Do you know that 85% of headaches usually are metabolic related? That means from something that you ate, or your gut, the pH of your gut's not correct, you know, or food is traversing through your intestinal tract too slow. So it's putrefying. I wonder how being toxic might give you a headache, or it's going too fast and you end up with diarrhea. There's things that when you're looking at like how you feed yourself, I've had conversations with people who are diabetic and everyone thinks, oh my God, we should eat oatmeal, like not at night, and you don't have it for a main meal.
Yeah.
And it's just like, you can have oatmeal. It's just like occasionally, but not, I know people who used to eat it every day.
Yeah.
Do you want to know why your blood sugar is not changing and why you're getting up 5 times at night to go to the bathroom? It's, you have to look at what's going on with your glucose levels and why those glucose levels are not normal, and they're going so no wonder I've got diabetes. Not going to
But that's, and I'm going to use the word unique because the state of the world would suggest that it's rare. That school of thought of, I'm under the weather, my body is fighting something, I am sick, and reframing that is actually a healthy immunal response to a foreign body. What impact on the duration of that feeling does that mindset or that reframe have in your experience?
Well, when people do that, when you say you're healthy, your mind, you have 3 brains: lizard, mammalian, conscious. Your lizard brain's going, yeah, that's right, you're sick, and you will feel sicker.
So I'm going to digest this one. I'm going to synthesize this as best I can, one piece at a time. So your reptile brain is agreeable to your circumstance.
Yes.
To your felt experience.
And it will tell you so.
Okay. Got it.
And then from that, you have your mammalian brain who have collected everything that's ever happened to you, every emotion, every instant in your life, good or bad. So it's the holy grail of marketing, because what it does is it takes you from those bad experiences and puts you in a new experience when you can change the talk. So if you can control the talk of the lizard brain, when he's saying like, no, you can't, you feel sick. It's like, no, I don't. I feel healthy. I'm healthy, and like when you're taking in the conscious brain, because of what you're absorbing, and you're thinking, oh, those affirmations, I feel healthy. I feel happy. I feel terrific. Why is that? That's a great affirmation, but why is that? I'm healthy and terrific because I say so, and, when I tell people that I am, nobody ever guesses my age. I mean, some people go like, maybe like, it might be a bad day. I don't have makeup on. And so, but I tell people, it's just like your mammalian brain and your conscious brain are always communicating with each other. And it's the lizard brain is always communicating also. So anytime that you think you can't, your lizard brain will prove you're right, and you have to learn how to talk to yourself so it's productive and you're elevating.
Yeah. So your mammalian brain is acting in opposition of the reptilian brain, or
it's just there as a sponge.
It's recontextualizing the experience.
Good, bad, and the lizard brain's contributing, going like, when something comes up, you'll go like, oh, I always, it's like every time I meet a man like that, this is like a dating thing, because a lot of people can relate to dating. So it's just like, I always date these guys, they're always so much fun in the beginning, and then at the very end, they're like the same as the last one, and it's like, so you have to ask yourself, why is it that I keep on attracting that kind of person?
Okay. And that question is derived from the mammalian brain?
That comes from, when you ask the mammalian brain, that mammalian brain is going like, it's a data bank. Oh, it's because that time when you were 10 years old, your father left you.
Okay. So
it's something that's deeper. That is in that
I'm there with you now. So the reptile brain is an immediate response to and agreeable to your immediate felt experience, circumstance. Your mammalian brain is creating context, a narrative, and pattern recognition.
Yes.
Okay. And then your conscious brain then does what with those two conversations?
No, it tells what it wants to do.
Okay.
My conscious brain tells me that, like how we're communicating right now, that's my conscious brain working. It's not even functioning off my mammalian brain, because my mammalian brain and my conscious brain are almost like, they're buddies. in that. So it's always going like, can you do that? I said, I can do it. I'm like the best person, you know, I'm the best person, to do X, Y, and Z. It's just like, I go, why is that? Because I am, and it's just like, can you do X, Y, and Z? I can, so at any rate, that's like, I have, it's just that philosophy of like playing with them. If you look at some other time, we can just have a call just on the brains, like and how they function, because that would be helpful for when people understand it. It's helpful.
Well, it's so empowering to be armed with that information, because at any given moment, with that understanding, it's like, oh, that's my reptile brain. I can now make a different decision in recognition of
that's your conscious brain.
Who's driving the
It's your conscious brain recognizing the fact that it's the lizard brain. Who's talking to the mammalian brain, and the only way the mammalian brain is going to change its messaging is if you tell it from your conscious brain.
Right.
This is so much fun.
I love this.
It's fun.
Yeah, this is so much of the reason that I started this podcast, is because this conversation is so intriguing to me. And when you're empowered with that understanding, because it all hits different for everybody, you're then able to consciously tap into that mammalian brain and adjust the pattern, disrupt the patterns that no longer serve you, update and upgrade them to create new agreements and move into a higher, better self.
It's true.
Dr. Pat, where can everybody thank you so much for taking time. I know you're busy. You have an incredible understanding of how all of it comes together, your physical, emotional, mental, spiritual states of being, and how the interplay between those levels. Where can everybody find you, gain more wisdom from you, and tap into more of that wisdom?
Well, first off, I want to give you a quote that we started off that we never ended up doing, because I'm branching out from being a doctor in an office, and I coach and I mentor executives, and I mentor people who are driven, and looking for solutions. So I had this quote that we talked about when I first started. It says, like, executives are paid for their judgment. Health is the same. The goal is fewer interventions with higher ROI and durable performance. And that's what I help people achieve.
I love that.
Period. So people can find me on LinkedIn. That's how we found each other. I'm sure there'll be LinkedIn. There'll be notes. I have a webpage that's being redone, but right now it's still called healthteamnetwork.com. And that's a good place to go look for different ideas, how to reach out and connect with me. If you got a question, there's a microphone on the first page that you can actually press it and ask a question. And then I will get back with you, on that.
You're the best.
And also, like, I'm on Facebook. I have a Facebook business page and Instagram. They're all basically under Ask Dr. Pat, or as you see my name on the screen, Dr. Pat. But my primary place of living is LinkedIn.
You got it. I appreciate you. Dr. Pat, everybody, remember, if you're on a mission to be the fittest leader possible, it comes from a place of integrity, courage, and ownership, but it all rests upon the foundation of alignment first. We'll see you next time.